Israel strikes Iranian diplomatic compound in Syria. How will Iran respond? The Israeli-Hamas war continues as the White House pressures and threatens Israel to cease operations in southern Gaza and accept a ceasefire with Hamas. This all under the headlines of a rocky relationship between the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, ignoring Washington's calls to end the war, and President Joe Biden threatening to cut off military aid to Israel, as well as taking active steps to have Netanyahu replaced as Prime Minister of Israel. What is being missed in these headlines in the United States is an Israeli airstrike in Syria on an Iranian consulate facility that killed 2 Iranian generals and threatens a wider war as Iran has pledged revenge against Israel and the United States over the attack. April 1, 2024, Israeli Air Force fighter jets conducted an airstrike in the Syrian capital Damascus, which is not an unusual occurrence since the Syrian civil war. What is unusual is the target was the Iranian consulate annex building in the city. This was not the main Iranian embassy building, though this is a distinction without difference in the eyes to the Israeli critics and others in the press. The airstrike killed 13, including 2 Iranian generals, 5 additional officers of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and 6 non-Iranian military advisors. The 2 Iranian generals who were killed were Brigadier General Mohammad Reza Zahidi, who is the commander of the Quds Force, and his deputy commander, Brigadier General Hadi Hajirami. The Quds Force is part of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps and specializes in unconventional warfare. Other casualties included 5 other Iranian officers and 6 members of various Iran-backed militia groups that operate in Syria and Lebanon. The Iranian ambassador was not injured in the airstrike. The war in Gaza has overshadowed the ongoing attacks in northern Israel from southern Lebanon. These attacks are in the form of cross-border incursions and rocket attacks mainly from Iranian-backed Hezbollah, which often results in Israeli airstrikes against Lebanon and Syria in response. This underreported conflict has displaced at least 600,000 Israelis from their homes due to the Hezbollah rocket attacks. Fewer Lebanese civilians have been displaced in southern Lebanon since most of the Israeli retaliation is against Hezbollah directly in their rocket sites or targets around Beirut. Israel has demanded that Hezbollah pull its forces back 30 miles from the border with Israel, but has refused this demand. Iran is the primary supporter of various anti-Israeli proxy groups and has coordinated attacks on Israel by these groups. This includes the Hamas attack from Gaza in October 2023 and Hezbollah on northern Israel, and this made, in Israel's view, the Iran military operating in Syria is a legitimate target for retaliation for the ongoing conflict in the region. So the meeting of so many members of the Iranian leadership in Syria and the militia group leaders, it was clearly a meeting to continue the coordination of the conflict against Israel. So it was a legitimate military target to Israel, regardless of the use of the diplomatic compound to hold the meeting. Iran, in response to the attack, has pledged retaliation against Israel and the United States at a time and in place of its choosing. One option open to the Iranians is to request Hezbollah to use its 50,000 fighters and up to 150,000 rockets to launch an attack on northern Israel. Hezbollah is considered to be a superior military force than Hamas and would create difficulty for Israel to continue the war against Hamas and simultaneously a new war against Hezbollah. This has been a concern for Israel and the United States since the Hamas attacks from Gaza in October. This type of general offensive from Hezbollah has not happened, so it is unclear if it will be the choice now when it would have had the greatest benefit to launch such an attack in October or November 2023. The Iranians, since the attacks of October 7th, have not been directly involved in attacks on Israel, instead relying on the Houthis, Hezbollah, and Hamas to do the fighting against Israel. So an option open to Iran is to get involved and attack Israel directly. The most likely targets would be similar to Israel and pick out embassies across the globe. The U.S. State Department has issued a warning to the U.S. embassies as Iran threatening the U.S. to stand aside or face retaliation as well. The Israelis appear to be prepared for both eventualities, that it has canceled most leaves for its soldiers in preparation for a Hezbollah attack, and has issued alerts to its embassies overseas. The Iranian government response seems to be most likely executed by its proxies against Israel directly, or Iranian groups such as Quds Force to conduct the attacks against embassies or other Israeli installations. Iran will most likely avoid directly using its armed forces in a direct confrontation against Israel or the United States. The Iranian leadership are concerned that an attack directly against Israel would lead to a response from Israel and most likely the United States that could weaken the Ayatollah's grip on power that is threatened by restive elements within their population. Whatever is decided by the Iranian leadership, and the initiative is on their side, with an expected response to occur soon. The larger question is if Iranian response leads to a regional war like was feared in late 2023. Iran's response, despite the threats against the U.S., will most likely be limited to Israeli targets, so that the U.S. will stay out of the conflict and avoid a U.S. threat to the Ayatollah's power. When Iran decides to attack Israel, it chooses directly to attack and not rely on proxies. It could lead to a cycle of response-counter-response and lead to the direct conflict that Iran wants to avoid. With the Biden administration publicly disagreeing and threatening Netanyahu's government over the war in Gaza, the most intelligent response by the Iranians would be to use proxies to step up the attacks on Israel. Iran will then not be risk bringing in the U.S. and the Israeli administrations back together or risk an attack on itself. The current state of U.S.-Israeli relations most likely means that the U.S. will not make any military attempts to restrain Hezbollah, like the U.S. did in October when it sent the USS Ford aircraft carrier battleship to the eastern Mediterranean as a form of deterrence against Hezbollah and Iran from widening the war. The decision to attack the diplomatic compound was a high risk, but considering the officials attending the meeting, it was a high reward attack. Israel and the U.S. do have a common enemy in Iran, and the decision by Israel to attack could have been a realpolitik attempt to remind the U.S. administration of a common enemy and to smooth over the current rift between the two countries. Most likely, though, it was Israel acting in its own interest to reduce the midterm threat to northern Israel by Iran and its proxies, and was made knowing that the Iranian religious leaders do not want a war with Israel and the United States and risk losing power.